Hello and welcome everyone for coming today to our Eat, Love, Savor Luxury Pulse. It's such a pleasure to have you all here today to discuss a very, very hot topic in luxury on emerging markets. So over the next hour, we're going to discuss global culture, mindset, and communications in this ever-evolving luxury landscape with our expert guest speakers. I'm your host, Angela Tunner, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our wonderful panelists. Joining us here today from all points of the world, we have Abhay Gupta. He's the founder and CEO of Luxury Connect Business School. He's located in India. We have Galia Bustani, DBA PhD. She's the co-founder of Iberia International. She's a retail consultant and a retail content curator at Huckster. We have Kelly Meng Parnwell, PhD. She's the program director and lecturer in luxury brand management at Goldsmiths University in London. Thank you all so much. A very warm welcome for you all to be here today. Kelly in London, Galia in Paris, Abhay in India, all points of the world, love it. Unfortunately, Marianne Mena was going to join us today. She's in Nairobi, but they've had a power outage, so she was unable to be here today. However, we're going to dive right into this really exciting conversation. So let's set things up. We've got emerging markets. They're not entirely new to luxury. I mean, we've had Russian czars, Chinese emperors, Indian Maharajas, long history of being purveyors in luxury. But we are now in a very changing modern age. And after decades of luxury democratization, changing economies, the societies themselves no longer emerging. We've got so much wealth creation beyond the elites that are coming in that is changing the perspective on their entry into the marketplace. And of course, it's very alluring and attractive for luxury brands to come into those markets. However, we are seeing some ongoing issues. We've had cultural misappropriation, inappropriately addressing these cultures. But here we are in a digitally and analytically driven world where we have access to data, demographic information. The world is very small because we are able to connect in such a more rapid fashion. However, we clearly are not seeing the whole picture on these markets. We are misunderstanding them. There's a lack of empathy. There's a lack of understanding. So where do we go from here? How can we address these issues? So this is what we're going to discuss here today. So we'll start with our first question. How are emerging markets changing this luxury landscape? Galia, I'll start with you.
Hi, Angela. Hi, everyone. And thank you for inviting me to be here. I would be sharing my point of view on the luxury market and concentrating on my hometown. I'm Lebanese, and the Middle East is known for its great consumption for luxury brands, but as well as its production of many luxury brands. The market, yes, is changing very much. And these past few years have also accelerated that change. The retail infrastructure has been, I believe, problematic in many emerging markets. Of course, Lebanon is one of them. And the past couple of years have been witnessing these changes with a greater impact. Even if I have had a high equity amongst many brands in emerging markets, customers would feel at a certain point that there are things that they want to expect and they want to have in terms of their consumption to luxury. However, this does not mean that any luxury brand could access these emerging markets as easily as they would in others. So they have to understand that there is no one-way ticket to accessing this market, because most of the times the infrastructure could be problematic. Opening up a luxury brand in Europe or North America would be easy, as you would know that there is a certain system that you would fit into. You would go there, you will find the perfect high street, perfect location. You have all the installations in terms of any external variable that allows you to do so. But think about a country that does not have infrastructure. So if a luxury brand wants to come into a country that has no good roads or no good technology or not a great banking system, for example, how does it come and establish its market or luxury brand in that market? Moreover, we would raise many other questions related, for example, to safety. If that luxury brand wants to open up in that particular market, if consumers are able to come and purchase from it, would they feel safe going to a particular street and consuming? Therefore, we see that in emerging markets, luxury brands have to rethink their installation strategies in ways that best fit the market. For example, I don't have a high street, but I go, for example, and open up a certain boutique or concession in a luxury hotel. Or it might be helpful to think of alternative ways of doing so. It might be a weak point for luxury brands today, but it helps them rethink their strategies if they believe that this market could be a potential market. But the past couple of years also, I believe, has given the chance for these markets to grow their own talent, because there is a lot of local talent that has been unexploited and merits our attention. And customers are more and more acceptive of the idea of luxury coming out of their own hometown. We had been educated as consumers to look at luxury based on a couple or maybe a very small list of luxury brands. We don't want to name them, we already know them. However, it's important today that consumers are accepting that luxuries can be grown in-house, and that these luxuries could consolidate their talent and develop processes that are very similar to those that luxury brands, international luxury brands, have given. So I believe that the interplay today is that it's the acceptance of the consumer and the opportunity that local luxury brands would grasp to develop their know-how, their product, and be able to standardize it to look like or be at the level of very well-known luxury brands, but to be very localized or reflect the local market as it should be. I believe that if I sum it up, this would be my take on that question.
Excellent. Kelly?
Well, I think as Galia said, the emerging markets coming from probably joining the luxury landscape in the last, say, 20 years, it certainly accelerate the degree of luxury democratization. So, of course, it's bring a lot of diversified consumer group, but at the same time, I think it has a lot of challenges the luxury brand need to respond nimbly. But what I want to put it on a more historical scale. So before 1980s, last century, I think the luxury brands operate in a specific manner. So mostly home-owned and smaller probably operation, but dealing with very top-notch of clientele. And there's a set of the rules for that game. Then from late 80s, early 90s, the large luxury conglomerate start to acquire luxury brands, and they become the luxury power for today's luxury market. And of course, they had the same power to set up the rules, the game for the game, and how they would like to penetrate market, engage with consumers, offer new creative products, and they have that. Pretty much we are still following that game rules. However, the emerging market really came in, reshuffle the whole landscape and calling for changes. I think we are in the stage probably recreating certain things. We certainly need to recreate a set of codes to redefine luxury. What is luxury? If today we're all talking about luxury fashion, our conversation will be completely different compared, say, if we're talking about experiential luxury. So what are the codes of luxury? and what are the new rules to play in this market, and who are the players. So, and they are not, just one straightforward, one-dimensional kind of a, playground. It make it with all the disruptive changes, technologies, and all this stuff. I think it would just create a multi-dimensional challenges and multi-dimensional opportunities, so that luxury brands probably, fortunately and unfortunately, put into the middle of this, and everyone look at them, say, what are you going to do? How are you going to respond? So I guess that's why today we're here, try to kind of talk and discuss more transparently, and probably offering some of the solutions, or even looking for some solutions. So that's my part.
Abhay?
Thank you, Angela. Hello, everyone. So on this particular question, I think I quite resonate with what Kelly just mentioned, because historically speaking, that's been the evolution of luxury as a sector, as an industry. And we all know that post the Second World War, it was all designer-led, it was individual-led, then it became family-led until the big corporates came in the 80s and maybe the early 90s. And when the corporates came in, there was money power, and there was organizational power, and there was management power, and the brands needed to expand width-wise as well as depth-wise. So we saw the ingress of low-price luxury products due to democratization. We saw width-wise expansion of luxury sectors and products. And we saw geographical expansion of luxury brands wanting to step out of the comfort zone of France, Italy, mainly Europe and US. So the minute they started stepping towards Asia, they realized that they cannot apply the same rules. Although I would say that having been involved in this space since maybe mid-90s, when the initial luxury products were imported into India as more as a second-hand dumping ground kind of a situation, where the brands did not bother about the consumer, bother about the market. All they were looking at emerging markets as dumping ground for previous season stocks. And I would say that somewhere down the line, India also came in that bracket. And I started my journey with luxury brands, luxury fashion brands in maybe the mid-90s. So the fact of the matter remains that the brands have had a learning since mid-90s when they started expanding, I would say, eastwards. And culturally, they soon realized that it is not as simple as what they thought it was. And duplication of the strategy that they adopted in the other parts of the world could not be cut, copied, paste in Asia, particularly in larger markets like China and India. So the early phase of evolution of luxury in India, brands came in, brands went out, brands came in, brands went out, because they either tried to copy what they did in China or what they expected happened in Europe, without really understanding that India is a subcontinent. It is not a market. We can contain the whole of Europe in terms of size of population and size of geography, et cetera, et cetera. And we have pockets of different consumers. In fact, and one of the papers that I've done is that we have 8 different types of luxury consumers. And to understand those luxury consumers, not only with respect to culture, food habits, consumption habits, spending power, value definition of luxury consumption, et cetera, it's a huge task. So simply implementing what the European way of luxury thinking does not work in markets like China and India. Of course, in China, the race for luxury started much earlier as compared to India. And China evolved, and China went through a lot of definitions, and the Chinese consumer evolved to the level that today we have a silver generation and we have the sugar generation as well. So likewise, in India, we have had several generations of luxury consumers from the time of Maharajas to the Gen Z and the Gen Alpha now, which is more like a metaverse native. So the fact of the matter remains that the same principles apply again. That can we correlate a digital or a metaverse native from Europe with a metaverse native of India or China? Perhaps to a large extent, yes, because before we opened the panel to the audience, we were talking that more or less the luxury consumer behaves in the same manner because there is a huge amount of digital interaction today. For example, Angela has put together people from all different parts of the world. So that itself shows that even the luxury brands are able to learn a lot digitally, thanks to the pandemic, thanks to digital evolution, etc., etc. So I believe a new form of management is evolving, which is based on the Italian or the French system of managing luxury brands. But I think country-specific or market-specific management styles and management systems are emerging. For example, I think the brands realize that we cannot force one collection on the entire world. And we have to have pockets of collections which are specific to a market. And it is those collections which are driving more consumers into the fold of the luxury brand. Simply by dumping European sizes or European thought processes, it's not going to succeed everywhere. So we do have historical instances of Burberry doing special collection for a Japanese market, for example. But that similar format has been adopted by various brands. And I mean, I can talk with confidence about India that a lot of brands have realized that we need to mix and match the culture with respect to our offerings. And that can be a winning streak. It is not only the collection, but it is also the communication. So more and more brands which are adopting to local language communication are trying to make themselves safe from the cultural misappropriation that they regularly face in China. And we don't need to go into details, but we know that case after case, China brands have been facing the public wrath because of cultural misappropriation, simply by doing something stupid, which was not stupid to them, but it was stupid to that particular culture. So I think that's one major shift which the brands have accepted. They were very adamant, say 20 years back, but now they are fluid. Second change that I see, that I observe in the past 25 odd years is there is an ingress of a lot of global talent in luxury management, which was earlier the reserve of only the Europeans. If I talk of my own journey, I would say 20 years back, it was impossible for an Asian to come into the top positions of any luxury brands. And today we are proud that we have a Leela Nair heading Chanel worldwide. So it's only one instance. It was a similar thing for managing a luxury brand within the country in India, that we would have a Luca or a Gianni or a David sitting in Hong Kong or Dubai trying to manage a complex market like India. But no more. Today, I mean, we have more or less brands being managed by Indian professionals. So I think that acceptance has come in a bit late, but it's better late than never. Because, you know, if you analyze the global management scenario, the top management professionals worldwide are Indians, whether it's technology or non-technology companies, whether it's strategy or technology or banking or investments, they are Indians. So why would a luxury brand want to bring in a Luca for a very small turnover of that brand in India? They realized this very late in life, and that was one of the inspirations for me to set up India's first and only luxury business school. So I think changes are beginning to happen, and as luxury expands into what we call tiny markets like Vietnam and now Africa and other regions and Cambodia, for example, I think more and more differentiations are going to come into the system.
Mhm.
Over to you, Angela.
But one very simple question that popped into my mind is why? Why don't these ways that worked in Europe not work there? And how can brands then find out more about these cultures to have a better integration? And perhaps that may be the ideal word, integration. But why? Why don't the ways of Europe work in these other markets? Abhay?
Yeah, so Angela, thank you. In my opinion, it doesn't work simply because we are different. We might have certain common traits, but our lifestyle is different, our climate is different, our food habits are different, our culture is different, our historical perception is different, our economy is different. Value of money for us would be different than a value of money for European. The benchmarks are completely different. I mean, a very small example of Europe burning at 40 degrees temperature. Indians are used to 40 degrees temperature, right? So that's a cultural difference. I mean, today I know in London we have people, we have friends. I remember mid-90s, early 2000s when I used to go to Milan. It was the same situation that the houses or the offices are not equipped with air conditioning, so they could not deal with global warming. It's the same thing in Paris or in London or other parts of Europe and now in the US as well. Whereas in India, we are used to that temperature. So a collection needs to be sort of offered. A brand needs to think, the weather is only one important factor. Likewise, the fooding habits, likewise, the lifestyle habits, likewise, the various minor factors which affect consumer behavior. The brands rushed in thinking that, if I may use the word arrogance, they rushed in with the European arrogance that, well, we've ruled the world once, we're going to rule it again. Sorry to say, an Indian is going to be the Prime Minister of London. So the tables have turned, right? It just takes 100 odd years to do, less than 100 years to do that.
Thank you, Abhay. Galia, what's your take on the why?
Well, 20 years ago when I was studying marketing, they taught us like this famous saying, like think global, act local, right? When I went to the professional life, I'd always challenge my managers and ask them, why aren't we acting global? I mean, just explain to me, why do we have to just copy paste something and just give me an explanation. And of course, in the years 2000, when retail was expanding as much, and I don't want to add more than Abhay has just explained, it was impossible for retailers and retail managers to accept the fact that something that has been doing well in North America or in Europe cannot do well in the Middle East. But they were wrong, of course, on many instances. There are many brands that has done fairly well abroad, but did not do well in our hometowns, and vice versa. So we started developing, and I watched that development, and I saw that the meetings started changing. During the buying of the collection, most of the skirts that we got, we ordered them in a longer version and a shorter version. I mean, this was a consideration for people who could not wear shorter skirts or shorter t-shirts, etc. And we started looking at the importance of integrating that brand concept into the local market and give it more sense. And this has been growing for the past 20 years. Now it's like the state of mind. So why didn't we accept it beforehand? And why were we so stubborn to accept it? I mean, this manuscript that I have been working on raised these questions and simply tries to tell managers and invite them to be very simple and very logical in their way of management. There is a model and it has been successful, but at the end of the day, it needs to be rethought when the market changes or the context changes. What better example than McDonald's? I mean, it's not a luxury brand, but this brand has managed to move on its process to many countries. But Abhay, you would correct me that there are certain kinds of meat that we cannot serve in India. There are specific sauces or additions that we have to include in the French market or the English market, etc. So this is proof of the need of localizing and thinking locally whenever we go into management, and specifically luxury management.
Thank you, Galia. And Kelly, your perspective on these changing markets, how the emerging markets are changing, and these whys, why these things aren't working.
When Galia just said when she first started, she was told to deal with globalization. I was the same. When I first came to the UK 16 years ago, all my essays was about globalization. Now all my students talk about localization. That's how things have been changing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that because I used to draw in my class, I said, guys, if any one of you could come up with a perfect strategy for any luxury brand can operate in China, India, Africa, and the Middle East, that's pretty much a 3.5 or 4 billion populations. You will be genius. You don't need to worry about your job. You're going to make every brand a multi-billionaire brand. But the reality is impossible because, as Abhay just said, China and India, they're not just two simple countries. It's one country, but with many, many sub-markets. And Middle East has many countries. Every country is different. And so is Africa with 50 plus countries, and every country has their own kind of a system. So I always, because my background, academic training is always coming from the political economy and the international business. So I always say when any business, particularly for luxury business, when they're entering these emerging transitional economies, they really need to learn how to navigate into the institutional system. By institutional system, I mean is I usually use a metaphor. I'd say if luxury brand is such talent, magic computer can do a lot of really creative stuff. It must have a two part. One part is hardware, and the other part is software. So on the hardware, luxury brand must understand the formal, the tangible institutional environment. What are the legal system, policies, regulations, and all this, you can say the red tapes or something you have to follow. But then on the other hand, the software, the intangible part of the market is the most challenging and complex. You have to understand the norms, the culture, even the language and then the customs and everything all on the soft part, all tied into the humanity. So that's where when luxury brand really need to, you ask me why, I think that there's always a kind of layer of a misunderstanding between the brands and the local. So there's I believe a lot of the brands already try to understand the local, try to appreciate the complexity of the market. But at the same time, I think there should be a two-way communication. So the locals should also export their knowledge to tell the outsiders who we are, what we are, how do you really need to understand us. So there's need a two-way communication. But what I always think and the holds the most important is the software, is the people. That not only the people who can buy your brand, but also the local people, local partners who can really bridge the brands to the local market and to also facilitate the operations to offer the inside intelligence about the local markets. And I think that works for pretty much all the emerging market. And that's probably where the precious resource that I believe all luxury brands try to extract in every emerging market.
You raise some really good points, because especially these markets where there's so much nuance of language and food and dialects and behaviors and mindsets and lifestyle. I mean, it's exciting, but it's also very layered and very deep. So it would require, and I think that's a brilliant idea, they should have people on the ground who know the culture, live the lifestyle, can understand it, can interpret, can, be translators to the language of these various cultures, and to help find those sweet spots on what is it that will resonate with them. Because yes, of course, luxury creates and it dictates. However, at the same token, there's unknowns, and so many unknowns that are quite richly exciting, because it just offers so much depth and breadth of understanding the different human conditions that are happening all around the world. And this, I think, is this incredible opportunity of globalization by being local. And it is so funny how I remember too how there was all this stress on being global and reaching global markets. Well, now we have, and we realize we have to get even more insular, more micro when it comes to how we communicate. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So segueing from that, and when it comes to these cultural differences, what are some of the underappreciated and under-recognized elements of culture and lifestyle that are not inherently present in a straight data approach to markets? Abhay?
So I think, Angela, as you rightly said, that this is very difficult to put a tangible number to these differences. And as Kelly and Ghalia mentioned, that every subsect of the market has different nuances. So if a luxury brand wishes to target that particular domain, I think experts from that area need to be patched into the management team. Because these are highly intangible. These are something which is inherent. These are something which is part of their family value systems. These are part of individual evolution process. And as a child, when he steps out of the family, maybe he will adopt certain global practices, but traditionally his mind still remains back from what he has learned from his religion, from his grandparents, from his parents, his friends, and his growing up process. It's difficult to sort of structure it and broad base it, especially when we say that luxury is moving towards personalization. So if we can't even personalize to a community, forget about individual personalization. So I believe luxury needs to practice what it preaches, that we want to personalize, we want to customize, we want to individualize. Let's first begin with individualizing to a community.
Galia?
First of all, I just want to go back to a little idea that you evoked earlier, that luxury dictates. It's very true. It's a definition that we have very much learned and incepted during our learning. However, when moving into a new market, luxury wouldn't be accepted unless someone accepts it. And this is important. Like doing this liaison, I'm not saying that it has to drop down from the elite of that country and then go. Someone has to accept it. Thus, the idea of connecting to a specific audience or consumer, etc. This being said, we have to also understand that today we have a lot of data. And I believe that as much as we have data, we're lacking vision and visibility because we're not understanding where we have to read. Therefore, it's essential for us to go into qualitative research, if I want to use the marketing term, right? And joining again what Kelly said and Abhay said, it's important to sit down with people and to converse, to understand what they are saying, what they mean, what our projection is, and if it's well perceived or not. Is there a balance between our exchange and communications? This qualitative research has long been disregarded, especially with bigger conglomerates or bigger brands, because they had a system. They worked with a lot of bigger consultancy companies who imposed a way of doing things, a way of getting into the market. Like with all of these processes, I'm not saying we should disregard these. I'm saying that on top of these practices, we have to give much attention to qualitative data, analyze that data and see what it really means and translates, and then do the necessary tweaks in terms of managerial decisions. Therefore, and I don't know if my colleagues would join me on that, we have to work a lot on short-term objectives rather than long-term objectives, because in these markets, there are lots of things that happen and the situation is always moving and very volatile, and it's very much connected to the people. Then again, our concept of strategy and application in these markets has to be customer-centric. I mean, yes, Abhay had said we have to practice what we preach. We have been talking about customer centricity for so many years now. Why aren't we seeing that on a management level, yet alone on luxury management level? And every time I get to the chance to talk with some colleagues who work with luxury, the moment I get into that conversation, or I evoke the idea of, let's rethink about talking to our customers, about doing things differently. There's a certain shock or distance that takes place instantly in the room, as managers are so afraid of not applying or copying what earlier brands have taught them, and not accepting the importance of local management and this qualitative data that they could act on. Right.
Part of the challenge may also lie in the fact that when you have structured systems and you rely on your systems and become very system and process based, that shifting from that mindset, because it becomes rote. However, a pivot in that, adding perhaps to the system, bringing in, as you say, those qualitative and quantitative analyses, and perhaps maybe taking some of those local people, and the dictating comes from a creative collaboration between the voices and the minds and the people for whom you'll be serving. Pull them into the process, pull them into the system, and create an access for them to be able to influence in that appropriate way what it is that will be coming into their market in a way that works for them. So, you know, so many brands love collaborations. So why not look where and how you can make more of a collaborative process in terms of creating that higher level?
Right. And adding on that, Angela, just a little point. We have the tendency to read a number and confirm it with qualitative research. I believe it's time to go for qualitative research and confirm some of our findings through quantitative data. And this is a whole new perspective. I know it gives reassurance to do the other way around, but it's time to just go into qualitative and confirm through quantitative, and as it gives more value to our management system.
Indeed. Kelly?
I think Galia gets to the academic agenda, but actually, the good news, because I don't want to bog down to the academic side, but me and another academic now are writing a book on the research method on luxury management. We are actually looking into the data research method, and hopefully in 6 months' time we could share a lot of the outcomes out of it. But the one thing based on our ongoing research is a lot of luxury brands indeed appreciate the qualitative research. Now, this is probably kind of pulling back a little bit. When I kind of started my research, I was pretty much trained in a very conventional, traditional international business studies. There's pretty much a lot of the international business theories developed in 1960s onwards. You know, a lot of these models are formed based on large quantitative data analysis, you know, including the Hofstede, and then because they have all these giant American companies, they can do a lot of surveys and questionnaires, so therefore that was the base. But actually coming into 21st century, a lot of the academics and scholars recognize the emerging economy, transitional economy, how complex they are. So therefore they actually call for more kind of a nimble and sophisticated research methods, including pretty much on qualitative research data, and to combine and to have a look at, you know, multidimensional, because how can we human are very complex creatures. How can we be simply represented by one set of data? Not. So we need more humanized data to interpret ourselves. So that therefore, I think, you know, the brands, and certainly the brands in both industry and academic recognize that. But what I really sort of interesting is how can, you know, if you talk about data, it's almost we are surrounded by data, but how can we really interpret data? And sometimes you can be given a lot of data. I'm sure luxury brands spend a lot of money and time and the resource on acquiring data, but how can we efficiently, effectively interpret those data and to really represent the true size of the humanity and human behavior? I think that's a challenge.
It isn't, because we need more humanization in luxury. We deeply, deeply need more humanity, because we could be dating ourselves to death. I mean, sitting there crunching numbers and looking at statistics, but luxury is human. It's man-made, it's for man, connected to the spirit, connected to our elevation, connected to so many other things that are intangible that data doesn't always pick up. It's conversation, it's creation, it's unification. There's so many things that are not on paper that are necessary. So how then in a complex world can we study these behaviors? Can we, again, pulling that humanity in as our next question, and I'll get you to tackle it here, Kelly, is how can a brand better understand these markets in a more human focused manner? What could be some of the tactics and shifts in mindset that could help foster a better understanding of consumer behavior? Because I really think that we really need to start looking at it from a more humanistic standpoint.
I think I would use a very trendy word, immersive. I think if they really need to immerse themselves into the local market, I'm pretty sure there are a lot of senior managers really managing mainland China or Indian market actually at Europe headquarter, a European headquarter, and I'm sure that's especially given now the COVID situation. But by really understanding and to engaging with local market, I think the brands need to have all levels of managers and management team to be immersively in the local market. Now, one way to do so is what I just mentioned, to identify the good and the right and appropriate local partner. Is because for some, before China joined WTO back in 2000, a lot of the foreign brands have to operate through agent via usually these agents from Hong Kong and Taiwan. Now, those days, there's a pro and cons. When you have a middle agent, they could really lead you into, the right direction, or sometimes distract you to the wrong direction. But there's always a kind of actual layer of resource for you to consider it, whether, this is something I should go, I can go, I could follow, instead of you by yourself, just kind of a potluck and see, I will try it. If I'm lucky, I get it. No, forget about it. So I think a local partner with local knowledge will understand the local institutional environment as vital. The other thing is, I think it's education and timing. There's most luxury brand entering China for more than 20 years, but 20 years isn't a very long time. That you probably see a layer or a cup, certain part of the Chinese market or Indian market, but you haven't seen the full. So it takes time to educate your consumer, at the same time educated by your consumer. Mm-hmm. So there's all kind of educations that are taking time to have this understanding, to come up with the strategy, to come up with the products that really work for the luxury. And at the same time, to come up with the local management team can really, really be the middle agent to help the luxury brand grow and develop in the local market.
And it might even make sense to have some of these pivotal people at certain companies, whether it's the creative director or someone who's involved, like go live in the culture for a while, go stay there, go merge, learn with that local person that's there, eat the food, talk to people, get a sense of it. Because I think, and this is the thing that always concerns me with our super digital world, is we're losing touch with people. Right. And this is where travel used to be so good, where you'd go and you'd, live in that environment and see things from different perspectives, live a while in someone else's shoes. And I think we need to get back to that kind of mindset in the course of business.
Yeah. And also, as Abhay just said, there are a lot of senior managers actually come from India. That's a good thing, because these senior managers can really bring the cultural knowledge into the European Western headquarters. So that's what yesterday I had a really good chat with a manager who originated from China. Now she's based in Europe. She said, really, every luxury brand should at least have one or few of these Asian or the market representatives sitting at their headquarters to really, as a consultant or providing some invitations for to involve in this business make decisions. I think that's what I say. You need to go in first into the local, but at the same time bring some of the local knowledge into your organization. I think that's really important to have to enhance this mutual understanding.
Mm-hmm. And Galia?
I cannot join Kelly more on that. I would hope that at a certain point we would go back to taking time and doing some ethnographical research. I mean, it would be the best way to understand the market, not only in terms of consumption practices, but how this practice is installed or installed into the social and economical practices, etc. And of course, I would be joining Abhay on everything he has earlier said. So if Kelly used the word immersion, I would join on that and say, yes, we have to observe, we have to be in situ, we have to be in the market, we have to take the time to understand the market and its dynamic, the timing, the pace of people, their acceptance, their approach, would they be like to approach aggressively, softly? All of these little details would really help us tweak our local management and refine it. And I might always be in favor of doing all of this data collection and analyzing it on the local market. However, if we are contextualizing our study from the first question that we raised, if a global brand is coming into an emerging market, how would it be behaving? So I would say, okay, we have collected this local data, we've analyzed it, we've understood it. Now let's us draw some conclusions really in relation to what we have collected here vis-a-vis what we already know about other markets. And this is also a learning curve for the brand on a global level to understand how it wants to behave and if it wants to change its original or adapt its original strategy. So I would take really the time to say that emerging markets is a learning bubble on its own and it's in its own right, but it also influences the initial brand's strategy in a positive way or helps it rethink its strategy. Therefore, all of this data and data comparison is very important. And finally, I would say if we're accepting personalization and customer centricity, luxury brands with emerging markets have to understand the degree to which we are going to go into hyper personalization and whether we can cater to that or not. I'll not be adding more because everything has been already said.
Okay. And Abhay?
Well, Angela, I mean, I was listening intently to both these ladies talk about thoughts which are running in my mind, but I would just like to add one more management parlance to this by saying that even when we send somebody to Mars or to Moon or we want to climb the Everest, we acclimatize ourselves. Why don't we do it in the case of luxury? So immersive, you may call it immersive, you may call it localization, but I think the correct word is acclimatization. So the brand needs to acclimatize itself to the environment, to the people, to the culture, to the geography, to finer nuances of human touch. It cannot be done digitally. And second point, just to add on to what Galia said about quantitative and qualitative, I would like to quote Keller and one of the 24 anti-laws. He says, never hire consultants. A luxury brand should never hire consultants simply because consultants believe in lowering the cost, whereas luxury believes in increasing the value, not at the cost of lowering the cost. So we focus as luxury managers, we have to focus on enhancing value. Whereas a general run-of-the-mill is not the right word, a general large-scale consuming brand consultant would look at how can I lower the cost, eliminate this process, eliminate this man, eliminate manpower, remove this office, whereas luxury doesn't do that. Luxury looks at adding value. Cost is
Maybe
secondary.
it comes down to definition too. So if you look at, well, what kind of consultant? And
absolutely,
if it's a cultural consultant, or if there is, a lifestyle consultant, or perhaps it's not even consultant at all. It has a whole other terminology because this is about pivoting, because it's not a change. It's not even so much a new, it is putting the humanity back into it, bringing things off the page, getting this immersion, if you will, this, it's like if you're going to move to a new country, as say, you were relocated by your company, you don't just suddenly go into that new place and live as you did where you came from. You learn about food, you learn about the language, you learn about the transportation system, the lifestyle. I've moved 52 times in my life, so I'm very familiar with this idea of, coming from one place to a new one. And you have to have this openness of heart, openness of spirit and acceptance, being uncomfortable with it being uncomfortable until it becomes comfortable. But I think that it's taking a new mindset for luxury. It's taking a new mindset for humanity in terms of really, again, imparting so much more of our essence and our spirit. And I think if you think about it, the spirit of the person of these hundreds of years old companies, because they didn't do data analysis when they created their lines, there was none of that stuff back then. It was just the pure passion of someone wanting to create something extraordinary and bring it to their clients. There are essences of that I think are extraordinarily important to bring into this idea of global and local and opening up the world. So I think it's a really exciting new horizon in terms of this integration of old world ways, new world ways, and to unite the world into the love and the passion of luxury. So with our last question here, it really ties into what I was just saying. So when it comes to luxury brands approaching these emerging markets, what then would be some of the key considerations when forming a strategy for market research and for planning? Abhay?
Well, I think we covered all the points in the past 60 odd minutes that we've been talking. I mean, the first strategy is immersive living. I think somebody from the management team needs to spend, I think that culture I've seen with the Japanese brands, I mean, not necessarily luxury, but they send an advance party, as we say in mountaineering or shooting or gaming. That advance party comes and spends time. The luxury brands don't do that. They spend time for years together, meeting people, talking to people, mingling with the local population, almost to the point of, I would say, if I can use the current scenario, which is not very pleasant, that's what the terrorists do. They come and mingle into our country, they get into our lifestyles, they marry into our families, and they're called sleeper cells. So they have the passion, and the passion has gone out of luxury brands now. Because as Angela said, 100 years ago, it was all custom made to one particular customer. It was all hyper local. There was no rush for industrial production. Just because we have gone into industrial production, we're getting into this kind of a messy scenario that we have hits and misses with the collection. So we have winner products and we have loser products. And that's the reason we are having this debate. But luxury, that's not the origin of luxury. So what we are trying to create is a marriage between industrialized product and luxury product. And that's why the challenges lie, and the challenges can be met only through education, only through immersive learning, only through hyper-localization, only through practicing what we preach. We cannot have different facades and different inherent mindsets. So I think those are very, very important points to be borne in mind.
Indeed. Galia, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, on top of these elements, I would add a highlight and a particular understanding of the perception of luxury locally, the perception of owning luxury items, the use of items, how do we use or consume luxury, and the rapport we have between the customer and the luxury item. I believe when we unlock those elements, we would understand exactly how our customer would be accepting us in this market, and therefore would be able to fine-tune our strategy if we want to still use that strategic
I think that's lovely.
term.
If you think about, a beautiful luxury item, incorporated into someone's, whether it's their faith, maybe it has to do with, you know, the rituals they have in their life, because that's another thing we've not touched on is everyone's rituals are different in different cultures, you know, and they really dictate our day to day, where we mark special occasions, how, you know, how family oriented some cultures are versus other ones. So again, there's so much excitement that's in that, but it does come from taking more systematic approach, perhaps changing some policies, some processes, maybe having some guidelines in place for companies when it comes to how they're going to approach an emerging market and how are they going to meet their and exceed their needs and delight and charm them. And Kelly, what did you want to add?
Well, I think, I mean, I completely agree with Abhay and Galia, but one thing, probably more on the micro level, I would say, while luxury brands all focus on the Gen Z generation, I think we have a lot of other generations still as the major, one of the major consuming power for luxury industry. So those shouldn't be overlooked.
You know.
Yeah, and the other thing is Gen Z not only be the major consumers, nurture them as your brand ambassador and as your employees and the future managers for your brand, especially locally. That's probably one of the best investment luxury brands could do, to invest for their own brands, invest in the future, you know, managers from this Gen Z generation. I think that will really bring them a long-term benefit. So that's what I want to add.
Fantastic. Well, let's have that as the last word for today. We've come to the end of our time together. So I wanted to say thank you, Kelly, Galia, Abhay, for being here today, for sharing with us your knowledge, your insights, and your generosity for such an exciting and engaging conversation we've had today. And thank you all for coming, who have attended today. The replay will be available for you to watch. And I'm, again, Angela Tunner, founder and editor-in-chief of Eat, Love, Savor. So until the next time we meet again, farewell.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Angela.
Thank you, ladies.
Bye-bye.
Pleasure meeting
Thank
you all. Bye-bye.
Kelly.